What a day. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Evan. Thanks for having me.
Do you know why today's a great day?
Because we're going to talk about research and data.
Yes. And also, uh, I realize that today is about the 4-year anniversary. A little short of it, but this is like a celebratory
hmm
um, podcast today because it's been 4 years of destroying the us and them narrative on Meyerside Chats, and with all the work you do in working to get people to think independently and rationally about all these difficult problems. I feel like it's a great celebratory episode today. So thank you.
Yes, 4 years is really impressive. I know how much work goes into these things. So, congratulations. That's a huge milestone.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Let me do a quick AI drafted intro to you, and then I'll pretend that it's not AI and that I'm not reading it either. But I should give
Okay.
an overview and then tell me how I do. All right.
All right.
All right. Here we go. Lura Forcum is a political psychology practitioner and organizational leader with a PhD in consumer psychology, currently serving as president of Independent Center. She combines her academic training and marketing expertise, including 7 years as a marketing professor and previous service as director of marketing communications at State Policy Network, to understand how people form beliefs, how to motivate healthier civic engagement, and her career spans policy organizations, public education, fundraising, PR, and strategic communication, all centered on political persuasion and the psychology of decision making. Through her relationship, through her leadership, she runs initiatives aimed at reducing polarization by promoting cooperative governments, encouraging civic participation, and elevating pragmatic, independent voices over partisan extremes. We think so much alike on so many things. It's so excited to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a nice intro. I like that one.
Did I
I
get all the
sound
facts right?
Yeah, the facts are right. I'm like, what does AI think of me? This is interesting.
Well, I plugged it in to get some, I had to do a little plugging.
hmm
It wasn't without some guidance, but I think it thinks highly of you.
I sound good.
You sound good. And so just brief, anything I missed on there, tell me just to kick things off a little bit about yourself
hmm
and Independent Center and what you're up to.
Yeah, so I came to this work in kind of an odd direction, I guess. I did a PhD in consumer psychology a long time ago at this point, but my interest has always been in how you reach people with complicated ideas, like public policy ideas, and how you understand like what they think and get their values and preferences incorporated into government. So it's really important that we understand information about people's daily lives and their experiences and the things that are important to them and not when we're making public policy, because when we get that wrong, we you can really mess up people's lives with public policy. And I've seen firsthand some really big messes. When I was in high school, I actually was an intern working for the lieutenant governor of North Carolina, who at that time, North Carolina had passed this law where if you were a repeat drunk driver, they would seize your car and sell it and give the money to the school district, which sounds fantastic, right? Like win-win, money for the school district, punish drunk drivers, stop them from being destructive. Sounds so good. My job that summer was to call sheriffs from every county in the state and hear why they were so mad. And the reason they were mad is because they were paying months of impoundment fees for cars that were worth nothing, because people who are repeat drunk drivers are not taking care of their cars. They have a problem. And um and they weren't making any money. They were losing money and they were pissed. And so, like, that was my first sort of introduction to the idea
Wow.
that you could have really good intentions and have a bipartisan policy that, like, just didn't do anything useful in practice. And of course, there's like a million examples of those things. So, I care about good public policy. I think it can make people's lives better. But I think first we have to like really understand where people are and what they need. And that's what we try to do at the Independence Center by enfranchising people who are usually kind of politically homeless. Like, that's what they would say about themselves. They don't feel attached to either party. Sometimes it's because they really dislike both parties. Sometimes it's because they say, like, "I don't really see a difference," or they say, like, "There are pieces of both that I like." But the bigger concern we have is, well, if they get the message that they don't belong in politics because they're not a member of a party, then we're missing their votes. And right now, 43% of Americans say they're political independents. So if there's 43% of Americans who are kind of hit or miss on voting in elections or just engaging politically, like that's a serious concern for democratic representation, for good public policy making, a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, just you mentioned something interesting, and that's just, any policy you make is going to have byproducts that are unexpected, unknown
Mhm.
unknowns, right? When you're forcing people down a certain path, they find loopholes, there's
Yes.
consequences. That's with every policy. And anytime you change a course of action, I guess ever, right? Like if you tell someone, nope, now take you're going to go from here and we're going to go this way, they're going to be like,
Mhm.
well, now I have to adapt to that. So everything in
Mhm.
around the world has to adapt to this new
Yeah.
thing. So how do you, I guess the first thing is, how do you measure? I can't even imagine that's been done right perfectly, at least a lot, because
Mhm.
you just can't predict. The world's too complicated to predict those things. How do we
I
deal with some of this?
That's a really interesting question. Like, how well can we actually predict the failures of policy? A lot of times, I have the same question you do, which is like, did we really not know that's how things were going to go, or did just nobody cared? They wanted a win
Yeah.
for their side. There's support from somebody that's driving this, right? Like, I'm genuinely curious about that. It's kind of like tariffs right now, right? Like, I think most mainstream economists were like, this will definitely increase prices. And, we did it anyway. And now we're seeing prices increase. I don't know if the answer is like we should listen to the economists more. um,
Yeah.
I think, like kind of were alluding to, people adapt their behavior in really like brilliant ways. That's one of the things that's so remarkable about people's response to public policy is they're ingenious at continuing to do the thing they were already going to do. So the mindset I bring to it is like my default assumption is that we probably can't change people's behavior. And I think if more people worked from that assumption, we might be a little more circumspect about what we could accomplish with laws. There's some things you can't fix through legislation, everything, can't be solved with a new law. But I think that this idea that you can just pass a law and change behavior, I think we kind of saw the limit of that during COVID, right? Where you were like, right, health systems are like, we're trying to keep you safe. We need you to do these things to keep you safe. And people are kind of like, well, okay, but I'm also gonna continue doing a lot of the things just like I was
Or make
before.
my own choices. In
Mhm.
that position, it was more like, I remember the big thing was like, wasn't so much about, it was a lot about you're forcing me to take a new technology. I remember that,
Mhm.
like the
You mean the
mRNA, which was,
vaccine? Mhm.
yeah. And I think people felt sensitive, and I actually understood that mindset. It's not about agree or disagree, but there's this, when someone tells you to do something, how far
Mhm.
are you breaking past their comfort zone of what's
Mhm.
acceptable? Sure, you want to give vaccines to people? Go for it. You're going to force me to take this new
Mhm.
vaccine type that you're experimenting on us now? So, like, you know, some people had issue with that. Some people didn't.
Mhm.
Better for the whole society. Don't tell me what to do at the same
Yeah.
time. Right? Yeah, like it was a weird, it made both sides, I thought, had some good understanding. And I think that was the thing. It wasn't like all those people are anti-vaxxers, because what
Mhm.
started to happen was that a lot of those people got called anti-vaxxers. They weren't all anti-vaxxers. Some of them were,
Right.
but they were just like, you're forcing me to take a booster every 2 weeks. It's getting weird.
Yeah, I
You
I
know?
agree. I was thinking of even prior to the vaccines, right? When they're saying, "Well, we need social distancing," right? Um, people's initial response to most policy is reactance, right? Like reactance is this psychological phenomenon that's like really well studied because basically the more you push somebody, the more they dig their heels in. And so like if you're a parent, I feel like that parenting is your graduate education and what reactance is really like, right? Like reactance is your 2-year-old when you're trying to hold their hand in a parking lot, like yanking it away, right? And they're like,
Yeah.
no,
Right.
I'm going to run through this parking lot, right? Like adults have the same thing. And when you're like, no, you're going to get a vaccine, they're like, oh, hell no, we won't go, right? Like
Yeah.
you suddenly see everybody in America kind of bristling about being made to do something. And, the national conversation that we had about the vaccines, I feel like was kind of dumb. And I think actually like a lot of policy conversations, when they break down into a left right policy conversation, they get really dumb because you're either an anti vaxxer or you're like sheeple, right?
Right.
And like, there's no nuance, there's no complexities, there's no space for the person who's like, well, actually, I have a medically complex kid and I don't think that I understand this well enough to,
Sure.
I don't feel trust. What would it take for me to feel trust? And we are just going to call them an anti vaxxer,
That was it. You nailed it.
right?
Yeah.
And just like the people who are very enthusiastic about it, right? Like, sort of dismissing their willingness to take the vaccine as being like, uncritical or gullible. It's not helpful either, right? Like they might have reasons why they really are willing to try anything to stay healthy.
Sure. But that stuff doesn't sell on social media. That stuff
No,
doesn't
it
get a lot of
doesn't.
clicks and eyeballs. You need the anti-vaxxers versus the sheeple, and that's what, and all of a sudden you categorize them all that way. But you made a really good point about parenting, um, as well, and it's worth trying to understand that core psychological element that gets, um,
Mhm.
people, thinking about, uh, politics, right? And we discussed this actually a little bit, the similarities between raising kids, um, with self-discipline,
Mhm.
and cultivating a healthy democracy. This is
Mhm.
right. Like, and how do you, there's so many of those innate primate mechanisms that are reacting to how we see the world and the way that
Mhm.
we react to stimulation that sometimes bubble up from underneath. And COVID maybe have been a good example of that for, um, the way people feel potentially about people like Donald Trump or Biden, if you don't like him or
Mhm.
whoever, there's like something core and they start reacting like children. So,
Mhm.
question, what are the parallels that you see between raising kids,
Mhm.
and cultivating, uh, a healthy democracy?
So the thing that I think about the most with both my parenting and um government, right? Like civic life is that the parallel I see is like you can have a relationship or you can have control, but you can't have both. Right? So like when I'm thinking about, you know, getting my kids to behave in a way that I think is going to lead to good outcomes for them over their lives, right? Like me having rules about every single thing that happens in the household isn't having them rely on like their internal values, right? Like what I really want to do is have them develop an internal sense of what's right and what's good. And I'd like to shape that, but I know that I can't control it. And I know that my ability to work cooperatively with them and have trust between each other, that comes from the relationship we have. And I think what we're seeing in American society is the fact that as trust breaks down for a lot of different reasons, right? Like a lot of really complex factors that are all coming together, converging. Um, when we look at that lack of trust and think that we can fix it with our political party being in power or more severe punishments for people who break laws or more laws to regulate behavior, I think we're missing the point. We're creating a society where there's a lot of surveillance. There's a lot of, like, restrictions on behavior. I think it was Neil Gorsuch recently, the Supreme Court justice, who wrote a book about this, and he claimed that, that probably most Americans were breaking a law every day of the week without knowing it or intending to, because there's so much law, right? So, like, this is just, is this really how we wanna live our lives? And I think there's a place for civic relationships that keeps us safe, right? Like, promotes well-being, helps us act collectively in a way that's good for us as individuals and good for our communities. There's a way to accomplish that, but it's probably not through top-down control. I just don't think that that's feasible, and I don't think people flourish under those conditions.
Yeah.
Just like my
Well, what
kids wouldn't flourish, like, what I'm trying to get is flourishing for my kids.
yeah. Well, let's come up with an example of something that would work.
So I think one of the primary things, like, if I could kind of wave a wand, um, it would be getting people more engaged in local government, because I think there's a lot more ability for local government to be responsive to people's needs and their daily lives, right? Like, if you're like, hey, the trash isn't getting picked up, or like that house is empty and there are people squatting in it, right? Like, fixing these like local things is something that you can actually do that materially changes your well-being.
Yeah.
And it gives you an opportunity to work with people of political differences that you don't get when everybody's focus is on Washington, D.C. And, when everybody's focused on national politics, a friend of mine calls this pseudo politics, because it's like, it feels like you're politically engaged, but all you're really doing is being really outraged or critical or negative. It
Yeah.
doesn't actually do anything to build the relationships with the people around you. So you can have relationships with people in your community. You guys can do stuff together, um, and you can also cooperate with people who are different from you. And I think, like, the more we're locked into the tribal two-party narrative that's focused on Washington, it's far away, the more you think that it's not safe for you to cooperate with people who disagree with you. And I think that is really damaging for us, because the less we interact and cooperate, the more we just sort of have a mental image of these people as being less than us or opposed to us or dangerous for us.
Right.
So yeah, if I could wave a magic wand, I would have everybody at their town council meeting, everybody at their neighborhood watch meeting.
Yeah, I mean, actually, one of the things we've previously even spoke about was, um, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you generally believe that policy views are based on relationships, community, and upbringing more than a thoughtful analysis of facts. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I think most people's policy views are probably just sort of, you put it on like you put on a coat, right? Like, it's like, oh, this is the Democratic Party says that this is how we do environmental policy, and I'm just going to adopt it whole hog, right? Because, like, that's what you have to do to be a member in good standing. Like, if you
right.
look at somebody like Joe Manchin, right? Like, just became persona non grata for questioning the I don't know, it was the Green New Deal, or if I feel like something about electric cars, um, right? And so, like, at this point, if you have questions about what your party is advocating for, you are not part of the party anymore. And that's true on both sides. And this is kind of crazy, right? Like, this is not, politics has always been based on coalitions of people, and coalitions don't move in lockstep. They're people who are like, well, we agree on enough fundamentals to work together,
Mhm.
but they're not like 100% in an agreement, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's variation there. And I think that variation is actually really helpful to finding effective solutions.
There's been the buzz term, identity politics. It's
Hmm.
floating around now for a couple of years at least, and I think it's an important thing to think about here. But the way that when I hear that, I guess it goes a little further than the traditional belief, and that's that uh, separating belief from identity.
Mhm.
This is something I think people have a really hard time doing, which once something becomes a belief, they make it about they don't realize it's actually coming from their relationships, their community, and their
Mhm.
upbringing. And they think that you can very easily dislike something you hear. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to internalize that and be like, now it disrupts everything I've ever stood for my whole life just because I feel this way on the president or the vaccines or I don't know, Mamdani, if you're in New York now, he's like second to popularity of Trump out of almost nowhere, which was fascinating to watch.
Mhm.
But like you almost and that's not just the individual who comes up with the belief and turns it into their identity. It's other
Mhm.
people assuming their belief that someone else's belief is also their identity and it's attacking their identity.
Mhm. Right.
It's like identity versus identity. Instead of like, I watched a thing that a guy reported on. I like this guy,
Mhm.
and he told me based on his research. And we don't do that. It's like you think like like they were sitting in the room with, the presidents of two countries behind closed doors, and they have all the information, and they're not 4 chain links removed, right? And then
Mhm.
somehow that becomes an identity conversation. It's so irrational. Um, yeah,
Yeah, because you can't have a consultative policy-making process when we're talking about two identities, right? It's like you can't take, Catholics and Protestants and get them to agree on stuff so that they can have a merged religion. Like, wars have been fought, people have died,
yeah,
we know this. We
yeah,
already like tested this. Right, so when it's an identity, like there's no room for anybody to move, and that's fine if we're talking about religious belief. We're talking about how we're going to manage things like healthcare, the immigration system, entitlements like Social Security and Medicaid. Right? Like these are actual problems we have to solve. They are not identities. They're problems that like we keep kicking the can down the road. The problems are going to represent themselves at some point, right? Like the problem of Protestant versus Catholic is not something that needs to be solved, right?
yeah,
Like we can just agree that they're separate identities, but when we do that politically, which I really think is how government is functioning right now at the federal level, then we're left with an impact on people's daily lives.
yeah. Yeah, it's scary. And it's interesting. I don't know. It's one of the mental conundrums I always get into is like, is this the worst time it's ever been around? There's a lot of that talk too. And then you're like, no one really knows because no one was alive throughout the length of the
Mhm.
country. So you don't really, and the documentation wasn't quite there. We don't have video proof of things from the
Right.
late 1700s to know if we were almost at the point of collapse in 1790,
Mhm.
versus 1810 versus 1830 versus the Civil War, and like how
Right.
far, how bad have things really been versus now, and or is the answer just people are angry and we're solving, um, this existential crisis against with two parties
Mhm.
instead of working on the things that we've agreed that they're mostly agree on.
Mhm.
And we talked previously. I'd love for you to go into that. Like, what is it that most of the um, uh, that most people agree on in these parties or in Congress, but we know the extremes are dominating the
Mhm.
conversation. But there's so much agreement,
Mhm.
but we tend to focus on the things we don't.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, so I have some research that I did while I was at State Policy Network with my colleague Erin Norman. Erin Norman is now at Heart and Mind Strategies, but we put together this research because what we were seeing was, there seems to be some real confusion within the two parties on things that used to be more cohesive, right? So if you think about it like this, if you meet somebody on the street who tells you I'm a Republican and you were going to guess their position on something like free trade, school choice, or abortion, right? Like, how sure would you be that you'd get it right? And increasingly, I would say not very, because there's actually now quite a bit of variation across people who are registered Republicans in terms of all three of those things, and even more, right? Um, so what used to be a little bit more cohesive has gotten less cohesive. So our question was, okay, if you assume that these two parties are made up of people with really different values and different preferences, which is what the members of the two parties will tell you about themselves, right? They would be like, "Oh, I'm a Republican. I have nothing in common with Democrats. Those people are, terrible. I have nothing. We have no similarities, right?" So we were like, "Well, we'll test this." And what we did was ask people questions about things like, do you feel like you have a community? Do you feel connected to the people around you? Do you feel like you have enough resources, like financial resources, but social resources too, um, for your daily life? And then we also asked some questions about harm and morality. So my training is in social psychology, and I think most social psychologists would say like those are kind of the bedrock things that guide our perception, right? Like we need resources, we need other people, and how we think about what is harmful or damaging to other people is kind of the basis of government. So we asked them the building blocks, but what we didn't do was ask them about their political party until the very end of the study. And we tried to ask any political questions in ways that just left out partisan buzzwords. And so when we had this set of questions, what we did was feed it into a statistical model that actually like looks for groupings in the data. And our thinking was if there's really two separate political parties, you ought to end up with these segments where we can roughly see, maybe there'd be some subsets of Republican, different flavors of Republican, different flavors of Democrat, but you ought to be able to see some natural breakdowns there. And we really didn't see that at all. So we found seven segments. Only one of them was a partisan segment. There's a group there, like one of our groupings we found was predominantly women, predominantly Democrats, and like pretty far left. The rest of the groups were all evenly broken across political parties. And so what that suggests to us is that when we're talking about people's values, their understanding of the world around them, there is no obvious like Democrats like this, Republicans like that. And I know we have like a lot of political rhetoric about what it's like to be a conservative, what it's like to be a Democrat. And there's just a lot of places where that doesn't hold up. And if you look over historical, the US's political history, like these breakdowns and the alignments of who is in favor of what, these have shifted over time. Like we're talking about them like they're set in stone, like they were handed down by the founding
Right.
fathers, and it's just not true. There's lots of examples of this. Like I always think about environmentalism, right? Like having concerns about the environment actually makes a lot of sense as a conservative position because conservatism is about stewardship and things that are valuable just because they existed before us, right? Like they get value and meaning just because they're old.
Yeah.
um, right? And so like that is to me that suggests really strongly that these should be people who like the idea of conserving the earth, stewarding the earth. And
Well,
of
if you
course
look at the
we
people who are naturally conserving the earth, it would be people who manage large land in rural
sure.
areas,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
and rural tends to vote red,
Mhm.
and urban almost always votes blue, even in
Yeah.
Texas, all the four major
Yeah.
cities, right? Like, so they're like, okay, so you have, and then you're like, and those people are also growing the food that you eat.
Mhm. Well, and if you're a farmer, right, like you do need to conserve the earth, right? Because like you don't want to ruin this resource that is your livelihood.
It's
It's the
precious,
same with hunting, right? Like if you're a hunter, you want game populations to not be exhausted, right? Like you
right?
want them managed to be healthy. So it's funny that like you have these kind of like pockets of environmentalism that don't make sense if
Yeah.
we continue to talk about it in a left-right way.
It's yeah, that's one of the most interesting examples that I can think of is like, the people growing your food and managing all your favorite places to go visit on the weekend are all for the most part, that's the Republican
Mhm.
like place. It's this, and the Democrat Republican conversation tends to lean in urban versus rural more than anything else. It doesn't even
Mhm.
matter the state. So even the conversations on like state politics, like we're like, the Prop 50 thing with California, where it's like we're going against Texas and Donald Trump, and it's
Mhm.
like, all those big cities tend to vote blue, and those people don't necessarily feel the same as the way the government is handling things right now also. So you're fighting, it's like we're having state to state government wars that
Mhm.
don't even consider the people in the
Mhm.
states. It's like irrelevant. They're not even important. It feels like in these conversations.
Yeah.
I've been amazed by that um,
Yeah,
lately.
it's letting elected officials pick their voters, right? Like this is completely backwards. That
Right.
that entire conversation has been shocking. And I think that's a really good point you raised that like I don't remember a previous time in American history when we had Texas and California like going at it, right? Like in competition or like right in opposition to one
Yeah.
another. Like, that's really strange. Like, I suppose we did around the time of the founding of the country, right? Like, we had
Right.
some
I
state
suppose.
versus state, right?
Yeah,
But,
or
like,
Civil War.
that's not a common, that's not a common dynamic within the country, and it's, I think, very short-sighted and, yeah, leaves out the concerns of the voters who live in these states.
It's also not saying what is best to make sure my state is prosperous.
Mhm.
What is going after Texas, like if you're California, what does that have to do with making sure you're solving your most important problems right now? Like that, it was so how expensive it is. You sure you do to
Yeah.
create something like Prop 50
I
and
haven't seen
distribute it,
figures. I'm sure it was very
the
expensive, right? It
ballots
was a
and the
special
thing.
election, yeah.
I don't know how many millions of dollars it costs to do something like that, but that all could have gone to getting X number of homeless people off the street
Yeah.
or putting them in facilities that can be supportive for their mental well-being or whatever. And that's what I see happen so often. It's such a waste of human resources to
Mhm,
focus on what other people are doing wrong instead of what you can do better tomorrow.
mhm. Yeah. Trying to stop other people, um, is a really right, like, that's back to this tribal dynamic, and one of the other things that I think we should draw more attention to is the fact that like there's a reason, we evolved to have these tribal dynamics and in-group and out-group dynamics, right? Like they kept us safe over evolutionary time because we needed our tribe to keep us safe and we needed to protect ourselves from people who might try and take our resources or harm us, right? Like
Hmm? The
that's what
unibrow people,
yes.
those people with the clubs and the unibrow.
Right, the Neanderthals. Um But, like, that served an important purpose, but in
Sorry.
modern life, it really doesn't, right? Like, we don't we get more by being cooperative, but we have this sort of, like, mental architecture that's just so easy to elicit, and what it tells us is compete instead of cooperate, and that's the thing that I think a lot of it is actually happening outside people's conscious awareness. Um, and and I think it's really important instead of just kind of saying to people like, don't be so polarized, right? Like stop yelling at people on social media for their political beliefs. Like, that's fine. I don't know that that works. But I do think it's really important to make people aware of that tribal inclination that we have because it is rooted in dehumanizing other people so that you can kill them and take their resources. And I think that that actually might concern people if they were able to identify it in our political discourse, in the way that parties are behaving. I feel like that's a lot more persuasive message to be like, "Hey, I know it seems like you're being rational and the other side is not."
Yeah,
But that feeling is all kind of like an illusion that your brain produces
sure.
that makes it easier to be very tribal.
Well, it's also, there's a couple things where competition works quite well. right?
Mhm.
Sports is one of them,
Mhm.
and business is another one. Like
Yeah, absolutely.
we've pretty much most of the people agree that a refined version of capitalism is the best system we've come up with so far.
Mhm.
It's better than the other ones for a lot of reasons, and it needs plenty of refinement and plenty of socialist programs and all that. But most people generally agree that that allows for most people to be their best selves and
Mhm.
create at really at the expense of others. Every time you create something new that takes a piece of the market share, you've
Mhm.
put someone else out of work.
Mhm.
That's the nature of capitalism, unfortunately. It's an intellectual form of it. We sort of all have agreed that, like, hey, you got to play, you got to wake up and fight in this
Mhm.
capitalist world. And same with sports, right? We do it in a very
Mhm.
friendly way. We figured out how to, for the most part, make that very friendly.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think in sports, right, like that comes from norms that are around or sportsmanlike conduct, right? Like you
Sure.
have to have rules that say, like, no, you can't grab people's face masks, or I don't know, whatever the football rules are. But that's a really important part of having conflict that is sporting and productive instead of just a brawl. Um, and maybe we've lost those norms in politics. And, maybe I should use a word besides competition, because I agree with you, like competition. And I'm a big fan of political competition, right? Like I want us to have more choices at the ballot box, because I think that competition will make voters better off. So maybe a better word is conflict, right? Because I think there are productive forms of competition, but what we're getting in politics is not a productive form of competition. It's conflict, right? And instead of being like, well, there's competition here and it's helping us find the best public policy, it's pure conflict. It's like obstruction, right? It's like I'm not going to work with the other side because I would rather continue to be able to motivate voters about problems with immigration, problems with healthcare, problems with abortion access,
Right.
right? Like I'd rather have those as tools to motivate voters instead of solving them.
Right. And this is actually one of the points I wanted to bring up is it's more productive to not fix those
Mhm.
issues. Right.
They're
And
valuable unfixed.
well, so boy, so many questions here. What is not valuable unfixed, if that's the case, right? And
Mhm.
what is the motivation to fix those things that are not, let's say, the big like, immigration, abortion,
Mhm.
etc. Um, well, people could lose their jobs, of course.
Mhm.
People could lose their voters who support them on that reason. But is this what is it really about staying in power? Mostly about getting money for your next campaign from these groups that keeps these issues unsolved? Like you'd think that the biggest issues would get some better policy. What's going on here?
It's a really complex system, right? Like there's so many arcane things that go on the Hill, just about expectations for fundraising and committee assignments, right? Like there's so many little rules and nuances. Um, and so, you know, I don't know quite. I think it's like the parties sort of like setting up practices that helped them consolidate and maintain power, right? Like they've done that really effectively. And then because they've sort of turned off the feedback mechanisms that would make them have to adjust their behavior to be more responsive to voters, because of that, they've gotten further and further afield from what voters actually care about because there's no corrective mechanisms, right? Like nobody's holding town halls right now because
Right.
they don't want to be yelled at by constituents
Yeah.
because they're afraid to do anything, especially if they're Republicans, that goes against the White
Yeah.
House, right?
Lest you
So,
get
like,
shot.
right. Well, that's an entirely other, um, you know, level of threat, right? Like, if you want to talk about what would bring people into public service who are good right? Like decent, principled people who are going to do what voters have asked them to do. The threat of political violence is going to just ensure that we have people who are serving in elected office for really mercenary reasons.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that like one of the problems we have with the partisan system is the fact that like when you have the two parties, people don't cross the aisle because their candidate isn't performing, right? Like if you're a Democrat or you're a Republican and the person you sent to Washington isn't doing what they promised, is having ethical breaches, is, showing themselves to be really unprincipled, engaging in illegal behavior, like whatever you want to say, you're not going to say, well, I guess I'm going to throw my vote to the other side now, right? Like you might stay home, but in a lot of cases, you may just go and pull your straight party ticket lever just like you always do. So the people that we actually need to engage are the politically homeless people. Like we need those nonpartisan voters, we need those independent voters because they're the ones who look at elected officials and say, that person seems more aligned with my values. I'm going to cast my ballot in support of them. Right?
Right.
And when you don't do what you said, they send you home, which is why the parties don't like them and they spend a lot of
Yeah.
time talking about independent voters being fickle, uninformed,
Yeah.
disengaged, right? But no, they're people with standards.
Yeah. Well, at different levels of government and different states have different policies, but for the most part, once it's very difficult to get thrown out of office unless you break a real serious law.
Hmm.
Um, from local to federal, it gets I think harder as you go up, but right, but you can. It's almost impossible. Like it doesn't happen. Recalls on people
Hmm.
referendums to get them out or whatever, or they have to, or their own colleagues have to vote them out. I mean,
Hmm.
it's such a rare case. You'd have to be a commit of the worst crimes for your colleagues to go against a person in
Hmm.
their own party and it get the party policy. So it's like, one of the mechanisms that doesn't exist is, hey, you're not doing a good job. Hey, you
Hmm.
treat your people really bad. You have a staff
Hmm.
of 10 on your team. None of them like you and have reported you to the authorities, and the authorities can't do anything.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter.
No,
You
no, there's
It's
very
irrelevant.
little.
You need no leadership, management, or kindness to be involved, to be the leader of a
Or
team,
effectiveness, right?
or
I mean,
effectiveness. None of that matters.
what would make an elected official effective? Um, like how's the Speaker of the House being evaluated right now?
Doesn't
Based
matter.
on right. He's
It
right, he's
doesn't.
not. Um, it's uh, I think our expectations for elected officials get really low
Yeah.
if everything is a left-right discussion, right? Because
Right.
it's like, no, they can always say, like, now I was just holding back the hordes of the other side. They're
Yeah.
terrible. I
Yep.
kept them at bay, right? And
Yeah.
like then the expectation's really low because when they say like, I couldn't do anything for you on healthcare, affordability, immigration, all the things I promised you, but I
Yeah.
did manage to stop the Democrats, right? Like
Yeah. You're like, great.
that's that's
That's where
that's
we're at.
enough for a lot of voters,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
And I
Uh
think
huh.
that's the mindset where we need to sort of say like, no, but what have you done for me lately?
Sure. Well, I want to thank you for all your great work that you're doing to try to fix some of these uh, very complicated issues. I think your approach around psychology, and being, I use the word, more philosophical around the problem is so important.
Mhm.
Um, as our mutual friend said, Shannon Watson,
Mhm.
we need more. We need more judges and
Mhm.
less activists,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
people who can think
absolutely.
through and weigh these things in a very nuanced way and carefully, and not just trying to, like, you know
Get their
activate.
way, right? Like you
Right.
have if you want to solve a problem, you're going to have to compromise. And
That's right.
compromise has become a dirty word. So in that environment, what we've done is sort of agree that we just won't solve any problems.
That's right. Hey,
So we
shout out
don't
to
have to
Shannon Watson, by the way.
compromise. Oh, yes, such a big fan of Shannon's work. Shannon, I think, is her the best description I've heard of her is that she is gentle parenting elected officials. And I think like that is we need more of that, right? Like
Yeah.
we do need more people saying like, "Hey, I think you can do better." Right? Like,
Yeah.
"Hey,
Yeah.
is that really aligned with your values?"
Right. Right.
And so,
Yeah.
that's the conversation we all need to have because yelling at them is not going to help. Just like your
That's right.
kids, right? I mean, it's back to the kid
Yeah. It
model.
makes it worse. It makes it worse.
Yeah, they just dig in.
Yeah.
So
Any last words you want to tell everyone today?
well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. It's so important. It's fantastic to like keep meeting people who are working in the space of trying to make things actually function instead of making it, um, a pitched battle. So, if anybody's interested in learning more about the Independence Center, we're at www.independencecenter.org. We have a newsletter, which we send out bi-weekly. And in the coming year, we'll be doing some in-person meetups. The PAC that we work with will be supporting some candidates for the U.S. House. So if you're interested in that, I can connect you with the PAC. And yeah, I have a podcast called We Made This Political, where we talk about a lot of this parenting and government themes. And I also write at How to Human. So my whole mission is like, let's get more people, more normal people engaged in politics because these are people who want to solve problems, right? And who want life to be better for everybody instead of people who are just
Yeah.
rooting for their tribe.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, we know how to find you. I loved this
Thank you.
conversation. Thank you. Keep up all the amazing work you're doing. Appreciate you.
Likewise. Thank you.